Hi there. This is Dawn Del Vecchio with dawndelvecchio.com and also this YouTube channel. And in this video, which I think is going to be the first of two parts, I'm going to talk more about this concept of the shadow because since I posted a video, I think it was 2 days ago, about light workers and the indigo warriors and doing shadow work, I've gotten a lot of comments, and also some of my personal friends in my private groups are asking for more information on this. So I did an inspired writing this morning, and I wanted to share some of that. And again, we're going to look deeper at this in probably a second video. And so with this one, I'm just going to start with, if we go to Wikipedia, what is the shadow? And this is just a starter. We're going to go from here. So I'm just going to read this little bit here I found on a Google search. In Jungian psychology, the shadow or shadow aspect or archetype of the self may refer to an unconscious aspect of the personality which the conscious ego does not identify in itself. In short, the shadow is that which is hidden, or the dark side. And Carl Jung stated that the shadow is the part that's unknown to our personality. So that's a little bit of just, technical information, but I want to now share with you what I've written here. So the shadow or shadow aspects of yourself are the unclaimed and unrecognized aspects of yourself. So shadow doesn't necessarily mean it's all bad, although a lot of it can be. And as I contextualize this topic of doing shadow work in a little bit here, you'll see more about that. So what would constitute the shadow? Feelings and emotions that you don't recognize in yourself, that you project out onto others. Trauma that's buried. So if you've had traumatic experiences in your life, you may have, we know that the psyche sort of can exit the body to dissociate. It's called dissociation. So, and then that trauma is in there in the subconscious, but you're not recognizing it. They could also be beliefs that are inherited. Also patterns, subconscious, unconscious patterning behavior or assumptions that are inherited. Also trauma that's inherited. So for example, if you have grandparents who were in Europe during Nazi Germany, or if you have family members who were in Vietnam or Cambodia during the era of what they call there the American War and subsequent regime of Pol Pot, if you lived during, in Russia during the times of Stalin, or not you, but like your parents or grandparents, that on any unresolved trauma that they experienced because they were just coping to survive gets passed through the lineage. So somewhere in there, deeply buried, it's in you. And it shows up as certain kinds of behavior. For example, here's a mild one. My grandparents lived through the Depression, and actually their parents lived through the Depression, and they were children during the Depression here in the United States. So when I grew up, my grandmother had a basement filled with aluminum or metal cans full of tomato sauce, crushed tomatoes, tomato paste, Italian, right? So they need their tomato sauce, macaronis, and olive oil and toilet paper, and just filled to the brim, even though it had been many years that they had lived in relative abundance. Also my parents' basement when I grew up, I never had, if we were going to make anything, just go downstairs and get a box of macaronis. Go downstairs and get a can of tomato sauce. Go downstairs and get that olive oil. Like my parents just stocked. My parents didn't even live through the Depression. So why? And my mom, because my mom would be the person who shopped, right? She didn't live through that. Her mother only lived through it as a child. Her grandparents lived through it. So that's a mild example of it, but it's there. It's like inherited patterning. The other thing I want to say is that gifts and talents can also be in the shadow. So let me come up with an example of this. Okay. So from my own life, I was in early childhood. I was told a couple of things. One is that I was a stupid head, and the other was that I'm replaceable. So, so how did that translate? Well, that translated as not connecting with my gifts as a communicator. But then even when I've been a professional writer for many years, so I've obviously now developed a lot of gifts as a communicator. That began when I was 38. So, second career. So, but even then, I have some very distinct and clear messages that I am here to deliver, recognizing that they're not for everyone, but they're for some. Some people are going to resonate with the message in the way that I deliver it. And so I've been quietly going about in my one on one communications with my husband, my son, friends, girlfriends, spiritual sisters, sharing these messages, but never making significant videos or starting and doing a few and then stopping, doing a few and stopping. Because I had a subconscious program that was running that said, you're replaceable. You don't need to do that because, what you say doesn't matter. Somebody else can replace you. It's not valuable. So that was my ability to, first of all, just even create a video and then to communicate relatively lucidly. Maybe I go on tangents, but pretty clearly. And the way that I am communicating a message is unique to me. So I invite you to look into that for yourself. What maybe dreams have I held for myself that I've not actualized because I have some kind of subconscious or shadow material that says it's not important, or, you can never make it as an artist, so you better get a good job, or, uh, making your own business is too risky. Get a good career in corporate and you'll be secure, or, don't do anything that's fun because you got to save for retirement, or you're going to die young anyway, so you might as well blow all your money and not create any roots. There's so many ways in which the shadow can show up. And when it comes to gifts and talents and abilities, the way to begin to uncover what those are is to look at what you really love to do, to be, what you enjoy, what brings you delight, what can you do. As they say, what could you do for days and days without getting paid and never get bored or unhappy? So, what happens, however, is that when we've spent decades denying the shadow, whether it's the painful shadow or the blessings of our lives, we lose the ability to even access that material. And I can't even tell you how many people I've said, well, what would you really love to do? And they don't even know anymore. They don't even have access. So we know then that that's shadow. It's buried in the shadow. It's hidden in the shadow. So basically, anything we cannot see about ourselves is shadow material, which sort of begs the question, well, if I can't see it, how the heck am I ever going to access it? And we'll get to that over time in this video or the next, or perhaps another one. It's the nature of the work I do now with people is to do that, actually. And there's a lot of tools that can get you to that, but I get ahead of myself. The other thing I want to say about the shadow is that which is hidden or buried in the subconscious mind. Okay, so you can look up shadow and shadow work and find out more. And what I want to do now, though, what I feel would be the more useful thing at this point in the video is to contextualize shadow work at this time on the planet. So I've got my little journal here. I keep looking to keep myself relatively on track. Okay, so we are living really at the precipice of a new age here on planet Earth. And astrologers call this the age of Aquarius. And depending on how old you are, you may remember that song from the 60s, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the time of harmony and understanding. And it harkens to this time of greater peace and greater, I would also say, self-actualization of humans. And we started to see this in the 60s, and in the 70s with the human potential movement, and then in the 80s with things like women gathering in circle, a few men's groups also starting, the recycling movement, natural medicine, organic food. So there's been some steps along the way, basically since the 60s, and the counterculture coming on board, triggered by the severe racism in the United States, the war in Southeast Asia, and other things. But the planet started to awaken. Maybe it started here in America. I don't know how it was in Europe and Australia, but I know that there were many places where this was unfolding over a period of decades. So so this is basically an evolution of the human as a conscious, self-actualized steward of the earth, and that's what we're moving into. However, there's a great obstruction which stands between our capacity to actualize ourselves as human beings, clear the shadow material, and live in some kind of harmony with ourselves, with each other, with the planet. And it doesn't take rocket science to look around and go, wow, this world is really screwed up. I mean, it's like constant war, raping and pillaging of the planet, of human beings, of women, of children. It's coming out more and more, which is good that it's being exposed. But this shit's been going on for a long time, as we may know. Now, there's lots of material out there if you begin to look on YouTube or Google or books that suggest strongly and builds cases for the very real possibility that there's a secret controlling force that's either part of this planet or outside of this planet that's actually proactively attempting to keep us in this misery programming of suffering and alienation, and preventing us from becoming enlightened beings, from becoming happy, unity, consciousness, gentle to each other, to ourselves and the earth. This video is not about that. You can search for that, and I encourage you to do that. For our purposes, we really don't even need to go there, because all we really need to do is glance at history. All we really need to do is just take a quick peek back about 5,000 years, 6,000 years, and look till now. And the unending wars. When we weren't a global society, the wars were more location-based, but they were consistent. You can literally go online and search wars of the 12th century, wars of the 13th century, wars of the on and on and on and on and on. And it's just, the list is like you're just scrolling down. It's appalling, actually. And so war. So there's also when we tune into the amount of hate and fear and alienation, the oppressiveness of our need to work to survive, and how many people are living on in a substandard way. They don't even have to be starving, but they're working every day. I mean, many of us who have nice, comfortable lives, still many people have to work all the time just to survive in joyless, exploitative, sometimes jobs. We know there's extraordinary corruption at the global scale, that despite the fact that the vast majority of us work really, really hard just to get by or to have some modicum of comfort, that there's a very small percentage of the planet who are living just unbelievably extravagant, wealthy lives. And so there's like, it's so imbalanced and lopsided. What's that about? And for any of you who are going to come in and say that I'm some kind of, socialist, communist, that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is, let's look here. There's enough evidence to suggest that there's something really off. And whether you look at the economics, whether you look at the politics, whether you look at the war, whether you look at the violence against women and children on this planet. I mean, look at this whole Me Too movement that's coming out now. This is not new. This is not just one guy. Mainstream media may spin it as he's the patsy. This shit's been going on for so long, and it's still going on all over the planet. children being sexually exploited, women being sexually exploited, men being sexually exploited, financially, economically. It goes on and on. Massacres, holocausts of indigenous people all over this planet in order to remove the wisdom that they carry, the earth wisdom, the spiritual wisdom. Uh, leadership by force. I mean, many of the kings and royalty around the world, how did they get there? Because they conquered. So it was the brutish that won and then wrote the history. So, okay, so we don't need to keep going here. There's some serious problems going on planet Earth. So I don't need to go on. However, let's now take this and circle it back around to this concept of the shadow. All of this violence, trauma, separation, abuse, and alienation, it's permeated almost all of the planet, which means we all have inherited the residual effects of this, the shadow buried material. So if you think about someone who was in war, let's say, they survive. They have to get, sort of rebuild their lives. And so they bury that and then they pass it down to their children and their children's children and so on. So how many of us were raised in families where addiction, violence, abuse, neglect of one kind or another were the norm? How many of us or our parents were raised by parents with some kind of PTSD trauma? How many of us grew up or were raised by adults who were addicted, who have depression, or they're operating just plain old fear programming, which has kept them working at soul sapping, joyless jobs just to pay the bills. This is what we've inherited. And so it is that since the 1960s, we've been preparing for and moving into a new age. But to look around, you wouldn't guess it because of what's going on and because there's a lot of shadow material that needs to be cleared. And so what we see today is that the world, there's unending war, there's global war. If you watch mainstream media of any kind, it's just like fear, 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 hate, 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 war, 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 enemy, enemy, enemy. If you look outside in nature, I don't watch TV, so I don't need to be subjected to it except when I'm visiting people and they have a TV on. Look outside, you got chemtrails. This is poison. It's poison they're spraying in the sky and dropping on us. We got fracking, which is poisoning the waters of Mother Gaia. We've got smart technology, smart meters, smartphones, smart electronics that are actually toxic to our energy fields and quite possibly maybe even sort of spy on us or send some weird signals that affect our own brain frequencies. We've got just the overall pollution. And of course, let us never forget the risks of GMO food, fake food. It's not even real. So even as there are many of us who for years have been somehow doing our best to seed a new earth, we see externally a lot of bad shit going on. What do? I contend that the first thing that we need to do is go inward to clear our own shadow material. Now, I'm not suggesting that simply by going inward, I'm going to solve the problems of chemtrails, although it's not completely out of the question. Because when we go inward and we actually begin to go in and look at our own shadow material and then clean it out, what happens is we create more space for higher vibrational, higher frequency energies like love, understanding, compassion, self-actualization, the Aquarian principles. So it's almost as if shadow work is like doing spiritual colonics on yourself. And you don't just get to do it in one go. You got to dig. First it's like the surface stuff, and then it's deeper, and then it's deeper, and then it's deeper. It's a process that's over time. And what we know from, if you know the work of David R. Hawkins, who wrote the book Power versus Force, he suggests that one person vibrating at the frequency of love or above, which is like 500 or 600, something like that, is the equivalent of, I don't know, it's more than 1,000, like 10,000. I'd have to look it up, so don't quote me on this. But thousands of people who are operating at that lower vibrational frequency of fear, anger, hate, just, unconscious, stacked up with the fecal matter of shadow material. So I do believe it starts right here. It starts at home. It starts within our own psyches, with the personal work of healing and clearing, not just our own trauma, maybe from childhood, but literally a 6,000 or more year lineage of war and planetary trauma. It starts here. Is this the only solution? No. I'm contributing my piece of the puzzle from the work that I do and what I know. So in the next video, because this one's getting long now, what I want to do is I want to map out what I perceive as the 3 ways that people are dealing or not dealing with their shadows on the planet at this time. So I'll save that for the next video. In the meantime, what I invite you to do is to really consider this. Really consider, how am I living my life? Am I living self-actualized? Am I living with a sense of gratitude for my life? Am I living in a way where I recognize my own personal responsibility for the world, for my part in the world as it is, and my life as I've created it? Or am I living with a lot of suffering, depression, or perhaps addiction, or rage and anger, a sense of victimization over all that's been done to you? Consider that. Ask yourself also, am I showing up in the world the way I want to show up? Am I doing a career that's meaningful for me? Am I showing up for my kids and my family the way I want to? Do I have enough time to really be present with myself and do the things that nurture my soul? If not, and there's very few of us who are living that way, if not, then I do invite you to consider that there may be some shadow work for you. And let's see, is there anything else? Just give me a moment here to tune in. Is there anything else I want to share to wrap this up? I do want to say that if you are feeling, I'm getting something about hate, about the hate and the meanness. So if you're feeling motivated or inspired to put sort of hater language in the comments, I do want you to know that as long as I'm, not very well seen and I have the time to do it, I will delete your comments. I am not here to engage hate talk. It's not what I'm about. My responsibility is to invite people to deepen into perhaps their fear and their wounding, but not to feed it, in order to clear it, in order to take responsibility for the pain so as not to keep projecting onto others, which is a useless and futile activity. Okay, what else? Well, once I create the other video about the 3 ways that I'm seeing people cope with or not cope with shadow material, and cope with or not cope with this world as it is becoming kind of a boiling point, I'll link the 2 videos so you can go from that one to this one or this one to that one. I offer this with respect for wherever you're at, with appreciation for being willing to show up and consider how you might actually heal, hold, and reclaim your own life. And with the greatest intention that we do awaken into the next age and share more of a brother and sisterhood among humans and care for Mother Gaia and live in the way that perhaps we were always meant to live. Thank you, and I wish you many blessings.